What up, what up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers, my marines. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs. Chip.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. This is episode 12 of the podcast. I'd just like to thank Dan Cowell for coming on the program yesterday. AJ and Alan are off today. In the news today, Obama issues U.S. apology over bombing of Doctors Without Borders hospital in Afghanistan, in Kunduz. In less than 2 days, presumably, the United States had changed its story more than 4 times. At first, trying to make the case that terrorists, insurgent forces were firing from the hospital, and so on and so forth. This couldn't be better news for Putin, who is currently prosecuting his anti-insurgent, is pursuing anti-insurgent operations inside Syria. This makes us look like shit. Everyone at every level of the chain of command there should lose their job. There was a general that came out saying that ground forces, trying to pass the buck, ground forces did not observe proper protocol when calling in the airstrike. But so far as I know, he delegates the authority for those airstrikes to happen. When they happen, under his name. His name's on it. He might not have dropped the bomb or pulled the trigger or called in the close air support, but he takes responsibility. And more to the point, the president takes responsibility. This is a black eye for our cause in that region. As if we didn't already have enough trouble with what's going on in Syria, as if we already didn't have enough trouble with the strange bedfellows in Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Qatar that we find ourselves with. This just makes matters even worse. This plays perfectly into the hands of Putin. Perfectly. It's like we wrapped up a gift and dropped it off, and left it on his doorstep. He must have looked at the newspaper on the morning that this was reported. He must have been celebrating. Everyone at FSB must be celebrating. Everyone in the Russian high command must be celebrating. This is a great victory. Here we are, guilty of now bombing an NGO in Afghanistan, an NGO whose sole mission is to provide medical care for any and all who need it. And we bomb their fully functioning hospital, killing aid workers, nurses, doctors, and patients recovering there. Huge coup for Putin. We'll call it a Putin. Unbelievable. Russian cruise missiles help Syrians go on the offensive. Here, the New York Times headline. You're starting to see the rhetoric shift. Russian cruise missiles help Syrians go on the offensive. No longer are these are the Syrians characterized as pro-Assad forces, although it does refer to the rebel groups strictly as rebel groups, and you don't see ISIS invoked in any of that rhetoric. there has been some question raised as to whether or not the targets of these Russian strikes are legitimate ISIS targets, or whether they are so-called FSA, Free Syrian Army targets, or who they are. But in my mind, as a reader, that the distinction between moderate and extremist element insofar as the rebel groups are concerned inside Syria is moot. That point, it doesn't need to be made because there is no clear distinction. Now, I could have that wrong. There could be legitimately moderate rebel groups who are fighting against Assad for one reason or another, though it wouldn't necessarily make sense to me, because when you put it in perspective and you think about, okay, who are we dealing with? We're dealing with ISIS, a crazed, psychopathic Sunni insurgency who with dreams of statehood, which will never come true. We have this radical Sunni extremist element, right? And we have Assad that's fighting that extremist element. And then we have these other factional groups that are also fighting Assad. So it's a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or in this case, it wouldn't be the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It would be the friend of my friend is my enemy? No, that doesn't work. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that ISIS is ideologically in agreement with the other rebel factions fighting to topple Assad. They're basically the same thing, if not the same thing. And when you have revelations like Division 30, which was a group of Syrian rebels, CIA-backed Syrian rebels, that turned around and gave all of the arms and equipment to ISIS, it gives you pause. You have to stop and consider, what the fuck is actually going on here? Is this not the biggest intelligence debacle since Bay of Pigs? This is the most half-baked attempt at the deposing of a dictator, a so-called dictator, democratically elected 3 times, dictator. Now, granted, it is dynastic because his father ran the country too, and I'm certainly not a fan of that. I think dynastic politics, Americans, we might be able to suffer too in the case of Bush Sr., who really was not that bad of a president, and Bush Jr., who was possibly the worst president in recent history. Probably since, since Nixon. And even Nixon has his strong points. You're hard-pressed to think about what Bush Jr. did to appreciably, positively affect the lives of Americans when you really stop and think about it. I would love to hear, but that speaks to the point Jeb Bush attempted to make at the last Republican debate at the Reagan Presidential Library, where him and Trump were getting into it, and he said something to the effect of, "And my brother, he protected us. He protected us." Motherfucker, your brother was in charge on September 11th when shit went down. It happened on his watch. He protected us? Are you serious? Are you daft? Maybe after the fact, and then everyone would say, "Well, no one could anticipate that they would fly planes into buildings." We could look at the evidence on that. There was significant communications coming in from the Germans, from the French, from various places, indicating that there was a high probability of an attack on American soil, but that's for another podcast. Obama issues apology over bombing of Doctors Without Borders hospital, and Russian cruise missiles help Syrians go on the offensive. The two main news items today. In other news, IBM venture with China stirs concerns. This in the international business section of the New York Times. Shen Changqiang, who once supervised the cybersecurity of China's strategic missile arsenal and spearheaded computer security research for the Navy, has warned of the perils of his country's reliance on American technology. This due to a deal that's currently being carried out between IBM and a Chinese company to build upon technologies licensed by IBM. The Beijing government is currently contracting out this work to IBM because they just so happen to be the people that know how to do it. The history of IBM, for those who don't know, aside from providing operational support, logistics, computational support to the Nazis during World War II, the machines which were sold to the Nazis were used presumably to track Holocaust concentration camp internees. Is no stranger to making deals that completely fly in the face of any national obligation you would expect a country which has its roots, which was born in a certain place. But this is the raw kind of wicked side of capitalism. You know, I kind of vacillate between being an ardent supporter of the free market, and then I'm also conflicted because as an American, I have certain national, I have an obligation to hope for the best for my country, which is why I'm so often kind of outspoken when it comes to things like current foreign policy insofar as Syria is concerned. But that being said, I was born there. I think America, after you've lived overseas for some time, you really start to gain a new appreciation for how great a country it is. You kind of gain new insight as to why it's not doing, at least it depends where you're looking. But if you're looking at the epidemic of gun violence that's currently gripping the country, or if you're looking at that we lead the world in child poverty, there should be appended there, because I don't know if that's necessarily true. I have heard that though, that we are leading the developed world, it should be said, in child poverty rates, that we're not doing everything that we can to be the best that we can be. We are much greater than we're currently given credit for, and I've encountered this in Japan with certain individuals during my travels here who don't necessarily respect the United States or Americans to the degree that I think they once did. And that's unfortunate. The only people that we have to blame really are ourselves. If these people are just ignorant, then so be it. Then they share the blame. But I don't like it when my country, when someone is able to get an edge, get an argumentative edge on my country, or say something or do anything. I want my country to be above reproach, beyond suspicion. not above the law. Of course not. I want us to be very much under the law. And, you say that when you're currently not necessarily in the shit on anything, but or when none of your people are currently, under suspicion for any serious crime. You like to say, yes, that we are under the law. We abide by the law, but it tends to change, right? I think it's difficult to kind of adhere to the principles that you espouse, that you're supposed to stand for all the time. I think maybe I need to restate that, what I just stated there. You want your country to be the best that it can be, but you have to recognize that it's fallible. The fallibility of the country. And yet sometimes you want there to be a certain infallibleness to what you're saying, especially if you honestly, ardently believe, as far as the data is concerned, that the given course of action that you've taken is the correct one. You want to be able to have that sense of infallibility, then at least. We can look to global warming as an instance in which you'd want there to be a recognition of the infallibility of the word of your state when you speak out and say that human beings are playing a major role in affecting the environment, in making this world warmer, or so on and so forth. Human rights, that humans deserve certain rights, that people should be treated a certain way, with a certain dignity, with a certain respect. You want your word then to be infallible. And for a long time, the United States had been winning that war for the hearts and minds of the world. And I think in many respects we're still on top when it comes to that. Or not that we're on top, but that we serve as a loud voice for those, the loudest voice, for those people who agree with the, for those people who agree with those ideals that we purport to stand for. IBM venture with China stirs concerns. That was one headline. Tesla's hit by 180% Danish tax on cars as green goals ditched. Bloomberg Business. You've got to be kidding me. This is total bullshit. Total bullshit. Fuck you, Denmark, you fucking idiot. Denmark will almost triple the price of Teslas. Triple the price as it phases out tax breaks on electric cars. The country's trying to go all diesel. All diesel. The country will also make diesel vehicles more attractive by canceling a pollution levy, according to the provisions in the 2016 budget draft. Finance Minister Klaus Hord Fredriksson told reporters, things have to be done with reason. They're stating that the government is defending the measures, by saying that it will help businesses save money and create more jobs. I don't think so. This is retarded. This is a step back. You're idiots, Denmark. You're fucking morons. You're supposed to be more intelligent than that. The Danes, I thought Danish people were pretty shrewd, pretty intelligent, forward-looking, well-reasoned people. Even if this were to add jobs, it's temporary. This is a temporary fix. Maybe it would make sense until they get their electric car manufacturing capacity online to replace the diesel industry that they currently support, and then that might make sense, right? But on the face of it, I mean, this looks like shit, Denmark. This looks horrible. 180%? 180% Danish tax on cars? On all electric vehicles? So, speaking of energy, there is a conspiracy theory going around that says that Putin had invaded Syria, not really invaded Syria, but gone to help Syria due to the fact that oil was tanking at whatever it is, $30 a barrel, price of oil. $50 a barrel, roughly, just about. And in order to, and that harms the Russian economy deeply. It greatly affects the Russian economy. Russia, it's been said, needs oil to be above $100 a barrel in order to be profitable. There's some collusion between Saudi Arabia, Canada, the United States, the major oil producers. I don't know how Venezuela factors into this. The major oil producers, Nigeria, I don't know how Nigeria factors into this. To tank the price of oil, to apply additional economic pressure against Russia. And now with Russia not invading, I keep saying invading, because they've done so much invading there with the Crimean Peninsula in eastern Ukraine. Now with Russia having a presence in Syria, the conspiracy theory states that they're able to blow up a couple pipelines, effectively raising the cost of oil as a result of that. It's neither here nor there. It's just what I've heard. Let's see, what else is new? Changing gears a little bit. Beyond resveratrol, the anti-aging NAD fad. This is an article in Scientific American on the blog by David Stipp, talking about what an NAD booster is. An NAD is a specific type of molecule called a nicotinamide, adenine dinucleotide, which is a compound that increases in cellular level it says here, recent research suggests it may be possible to reverse mitochondrial decay with dietary supplements that increase the level of this NAD molecule. But caution is due, it says. While there's promising test tube data and animal research regarding NAD boosters, no human clinical results on them have been published. Now, anyone who's been following resveratrol has seen a cascade of journal article after contrarian journal article, kind of debating back and forth about the effectiveness of resveratrol as an antioxidant in the control of, in the quarantining of free radical oxygen species that cause these mutations to the mitochondria. Now, for those who don't know, small biology lesson here. The mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cells. They produce all of the energy needed for the cell to function. That goes for any cell in your body containing mitochondria. Now, unfortunately, over time, the mitochondria have their own specific DNA that's germane to the mitochondria. There's other DNA within the cell, inside the nucleus of the cell. The mitochondrial DNA kind of exists exterior to that bombshell of a nucleus that protects it from these free radical oxygen species, which mutate the DNA in the mitochondria. If you start getting mutating DNA in the mitochondria, you start getting a mitochondria that's not performing or is overperforming and is kind of in overdrive and wreaks havoc within the system, within the intracellular system, causing all kinds of maladies and abnormalities. It's not good. So one way to control this is by controlling the exposure that the mitochondrial DNA has to these free radical oxygen species. And the way that you do that is, one suggestion was by taking resveratrol, which was found it was the French paradox, which states that the French have a diet that's very high in saturated fat. They drink a lot of wine. They're wondering why there's such a low incidence of heart disease in France, and scientists studied it, and I'm not sure who came up with the theory, but they started looking at wine, particularly red wine, and they found that there was this high concentration of this molecule, resveratrol, that serves as a very powerful antioxidant to quarantine and corral these oxygen species to get them not to affect the mitochondria deleteriously. The article goes on to say that recent research suggests it may be possible to reverse mitochondrial decay with dietary supplements that increase cellular levels of the molecule, right? As we stated before, NAD, right, the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, is a linchpin of energy metabolism, among other roles, and its diminishing level with age has been implicated in mitochondrial deterioration. Supplements containing nicotinamide riboside, or NR, a precursor to NAD that's found in trace amounts in milk, might be able to boost NAD levels. In support of that idea, half a dozen Nobel laureates and other prominent scientists are working with two small companies offering NR supplements. Now, there has been a lot of debate as to the efficacy of resveratrol. It states here, the NAD findings tie into the ongoing story about enzymes called sirtuins, which Guarente, Sinclair, and other researchers have implicated as key players in conferring the longevity and health benefits of calorie restriction. That's another thing to talk about. Resveratrol, the wine ingredient, is thought to rev up one of the sirtuins, SIRT1, SIRT1, which appears to help protect mice on high doses of resveratrol from the ill effects of high-fat diets. A slew of other health benefits have been attributed to SIRT1 activation in hundreds of studies, including several small human trials. But it's still inconclusive. What we're looking for, essentially, it says here, is a compound which is going to pick up where resveratrol leaves off. Presumably, supplementing with resveratrol can help ameliorate these conditions, but it doesn't go all the way. It says here that the research discovered that cells' nuclei send signals to mitochondria that are needed to maintain their normal operation. SIRT1 helps ensure the signals get through, but when NAD levels drop, as they do with aging, SIRT1 activity falls off, which in turn makes the crucial signals fade, leading to mitochondrial dysfunction, and that all the ill effects that go with it resurge. So, for what I take from this is, from my my layman perspective, you have to respect the fact that I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. Okay, like if you want to actually know for a fact, you need to talk with someone who's more who's credentialed in this area, who for whom this area is their area of expertise. Hopefully in the future we'll have a biologist on. if you are a biologist currently listening to this podcast and you'd like to come on and kind of help explain this, by all means, I welcome you with open arms. But my layman's perspective on this is that, yeah, okay, you can supplement with resveratrol until the cows come home, but unless you have that NAD level at a certain to a certain point, it's that the search winds in the resveratrol, they're not going to do anything. It's not going to be registered by the intracellular machinery. It's just not going to work. So that's what this article is about. I'll post it in the links. Taking a look at other things. There's a couple new cameras out in technology. There's a camera called Light. If you go to light.co, I think it's Light. It's a camera, multi-aperture camera. The thing has like 16 different sensors and camera lenses, and it uses a technology called stitching. It says here the Light L16 is a totally new type of camera, a multi-aperture computational camera, while a DSLR or mirrorless camera uses interchangeable lenses and a single sensor. The Light L16 camera uses multiple small cameras and sensors permanently integrated into the body. There was another camera which I believe had some computational component to it that I had posted. I'll post that in the links. I can't think of what it is now. But that camera technology, I wonder if that comes out of the MIT Media Lab's camera culture lab. At the MIT Media Lab, for those who don't know, MIT Media Lab is like the Willy Wonka's chocolate factory of technology, and they have all of these different departments or groups that focus on different things. The MIT, the Media Lab's camera culture group focuses, it says here on the website, on making the invisible visible inside our bodies, around us, and beyond for health, work, and connection. The goal is to create an entirely new class of imaging platforms that have an understanding of the world that far exceeds human ability and produce meaningful abstractions that are well within human comprehensibility. The group conducts multidisciplinary research in modern optics, sensors, illumination, actuators, probes, and software processing. This work ranges from creating novel feature-revealing computational cameras and new lightweight medical imaging mechanisms to facilitating positive social impact via the next billion personalized cameras. Now, one thing that I have been pressing for for at least 15 years now, are a constellation of high-definition cameras positioned at different places in low Earth orbit around the planet that are continually streaming HD video. Now, the ISS recently implemented this idea to a limited degree, but I'd like to see a much more liberal use of high-definition cameras in low Earth orbit. I mean, how cool would it be to have that as your screensaver? Is a shot of your region of space, wherever it is. If you're in Boston, Massachusetts, or you're in Abbottabad, like to have a bird's eye view. A bird would be dead. An astronaut's view of the planet, I think, would do wonders for people. I think being able to see Earth from outer space helps to put things in a perspective that might make life easier, or might get people to consider the big picture. not be so bogged down by their individual differences, their skin color, their ethnic background, their gender, their sexual orientation. All of that kind of fades to a pinpoint when you consider the planet at large at a distance. We so often forget it's like being inside a car, you're behind a windshield, you're traveling at 70, 80, 90 miles per hour, and your concept of what is happening outside that vehicle kind of fades, right? Diminishes significantly. I think having something like this, these cameras in orbit everywhere, would help us to really appreciate what is happening, what is going on outside the vehicle. Outside the vehicle of this spaceship planet Earth. And that's important. Looking at the Camera Culture MIT website, there's an article here by Pranav Chandrasekaran about making cities smart, right? And this is in the Indian context. He's talking about certain cities in India and what could be done, current initiatives for how to make cities smart. Let's see, what else do we have? There's a lot about this Indian city. This is kind of the future of cities, right? This is the smart city, the sensorized city. And people are worried, well, what happens when... What are we opening ourselves up to disaster by networking everything in this way, by providing all of this information? I know that from having used to live in the Boston area and in Boston for some time, the MBTA releasing real-time data on where the trains and buses are, like that opens up the public transportation system to certain dangers, whether they're from terrorists or just from just malicious entities. But I think not doing so would just be kowtowing to the terrorists, like you have to just go and do it. You could make the same case that, we shouldn't build roads because that will give terrorists better access to places by building roads. Yeah, that might be the case, but it's better to do it than not to. The benefits outweigh the risks. Cost-benefit analysis. You have to admit that. And the same thing could be said with the camera satellite constellation. Yes, could that data, could that information, could that capability be used by, or the personal satellite movement? Could this personal satellite movement be used by terrorists or communists or whoever it is to, to kill people, to plan military operations? Is Google Maps, should we actually just get rid of Google Maps because it gives terrorists the ability to plan attacks? No, we shouldn't. That's such a cheap argument that people use. They invoke that terrorism argument. And, I mean, what's the alternative? The alternative is this. Everyone just stays in their homes and nobody goes out. How about that? We'll do that. Then the terrorists can't get us. How about this? in order to prevent terrorism, we will amputate. We'll build a robot that can amputate and then cauterize the wounds of every living human being. That way we can't hurt each other. How about we do that? We'll cut off the arms and legs of every human being and we'll be fine. It just doesn't make any sense. Do we need to proceed intelligently? Do we need to consider these contingencies? Yes, absolutely. But do we need to stymie progress in such a way that we're just like completely hobbling ourselves while other countries go ahead and develop the technology anyway? Absolutely not. We need to maintain our primacy. If we don't, if we're fear mongering, if we're cowardly, if we're like smothering technology and development in so many different ways that we are, someone else is going to take the lead. We don't want that. So that's that. Tesla unveiled a new solar panel capable of like 25% efficiency, which is great. I worked with someone who had developed a solar panel with like 26% efficiency, but it was only in a controlled laboratory environment. So if they're able to mass produce that, then by all means, it's awesome. I'm just reading through other headlines. California is building the largest solar desalination plant in the U.S. Finally. How long did that take? China's nightmarish citizen scores are a warning for Americans. I presume that this is for science and technology. Wait a minute. China is launching a comprehensive credit score system, and the more I learn about it, the more nightmarish it seems. China appears to be leveraging all the tools of the information age, electronic purchasing data, social networks, algorithmic sorting, to construct the ultimate tool of social control. It is, as one commentator put it, authoritarianism gamified. Read this piece for the full flavor. It will make your head spin. The basics are this. Everybody is measured by a score between 350 and 950, which is linked to their national identity card. While currently supposedly voluntary, the government has announced that it will be mandatory by 2020. The system is run by two companies, Alibaba and Tencent, which run all the social networks in China and therefore have access to a vast amount of data about people's social ties and activities and what they say. In addition to measuring your ability to pay, as in the United States, score serves as a measure of political compliance. Political compliance. I wonder if you'll be incentivized to agree with the party. Among the things that will hurt a citizen's score are posting political opinions without prior permission, or posting information that the regime does not like, such as about the Tiananmen Square massacre that the government carried out to hold on to power, or the Shanghai stock market collapse. I think that's kind of overworded, isn't it? I mean, the Tiananmen Square massacre took place, but it wasn't like the government needed to carry it out to hold on to power. I could be wrong. Maybe there's an authority out there on the Tiananmen Square, but, if the Tiananmen Square revolt or protest had happened or not had happened, very little would have changed, right? This was a student-led protest, and what, if anything, did it actually change? Now, protests in the United States around the time of the Vietnam War had an appreciable effect on changing foreign policy. But how many times have you seen a protest movement like Occupy really substantively change anything? We're 8 years later, or about 7 years later, since the financial collapse of 2008, and only one Wall Street fat cat has been held accountable for those crimes. Now we see Department of Justice saying, oh yeah, now we're going to start prosecuting crimes. Motherfuckers, where were you for the last 7 years? Ben Bernanke comes out recently and says, oh, yes, we should have been more severe in punishing financial malfeasance back then during 2008. Really? Really, motherfucker? Really? Really, motherfucker? Well, why the fuck weren't we doing it back then? Now all of a sudden, everyone is growing a conscience. It's because the tide is turning. Tiananmen Square may have happened, very little may have changed. What you see today, you see a much more robust Chinese economy and socio-political system kind of evolving over there. Now, granted, if you're not in the party, then you're what? Then you're free market capitalist. You've been able to make a lot of money, but you need to keep that balance, as I'm sure the CEOs of Tencent and Alibaba knows. You need to keep that balance between your financial success and your political affiliations. You need to keep that balance very steady, or else you could suddenly be accused of being, a corrupt wolf, as they call them, or fly, whatever the case is, coyote, donkey, I forget what they called it, but China had been carrying out operations, law enforcement operations inside the borders of the United States without prior notification of the FBI to repatriate these criminals who, according to China, had bilked the Chinese people out of untold millions of dollars and then had fled to the United States. You've seen a mass exodus, actually, of Chinese nationals fleeing to the United States, seeking asylum, not necessarily asylum, but maybe to have their child in the United States for birthright citizenship so that they can, this is alleged, but allegedly, will them all their money, transfer all their assets to their child, and this is a convenient way, a convenient vehicle for them to be able to expatriate large sums of Chinese yuan through this birthright citizenship loophole. But China is a lot different. And although the protest movements of Occupy may not have affected any immediate change in the French Revolution sense, where we're beheading King Louis, we are seeing a marked change in the rhetoric coming out of the candidates. Even Trump saying that he would like to pay more in tax. One side note, Jeb Bush was interviewed recently by Fox News, and props to the Fox News correspondent, because I really didn't think that I was going to see what I saw, but he really held his toes to the fire, as it were, asking Jeb Bush what he thought, why in his proposed tax plan that the wealthy were going to see over 12% reduction in taxes, when the poor were only going to see a 2% reduction in taxes. Jeb Bush's excuse for that was that, well, the rich pay more in taxes, but wasn't able to speak specifically to the question of why there was this disparity. If the rich pay more in taxes. Okay, that makes sense, but they pay taxes relative to how much money they have. The poor people pay taxes relative to how much money they have. Why isn't there a uniform tax savings across, economic or income levels? It doesn't make sense why the wealthy would enjoy a 12% reduction while the poor would see a 2% reduction. If, with all things being equal, you're paying a percentage of your income, why would the wealthy receive a bigger tax cut? Shouldn't they all come down equally? It's hard to say. Anyway, that was that. Kind of a slow day, but we're just towards the end of the podcast. California is building the country's largest solar desalination plant. That's long overdue. The new solar-powered desalination plant slated for construction in Fresno County will make enough water for 10,000 homes or 2,000 acres of cropland in a year. Drought-stricken California is in dire need of some engineering solution. Whether that means you have to pipe it down from Canada, I don't know, but you have to fix this problem. Why we don't have fusion plants up and running, producing water as a byproduct of the fusion reaction is beyond me. We should have had this a long time ago. But, I guess it's not, the time isn't right for Lockheed Martin. Wasn't it Lockheed Martin who said that they had a working fusion power plant? Sometimes I'm nonplussed by humanity. Why, if things are so easy, we make them so hard? Why, if solutions have existed in sometimes maybe for millennia, why we fail to implement? Why, when success is so easy, we choose failure? It's like we're like collecting Pokemon. And each of the Pokemon is a different kind of experience. And we're looking to, we have the solution. We've had it for a long time. But we're completionists. We want to complete the set. We want to fail in every other possible way that we can possibly fail before we finally implement the solution. It's disappointing to see. It's disappointing to see obstacles that are set up in front of entrepreneurs and people with the right ideas and the right motivation who simply don't have the money to play the game at the level that you need to play it in order to affect significant change. It's disappointing to see that. Why we're not empowering people. Why in the last podcast I talked about 23andMe finally being allowed by the FDA to administer some selective genome sequencing based tests for certain diseases. Why do we have to hold people's hands when it comes to their health? When it comes to your health, the fact that, and I hearken back to the Seinfeld episode where Elaine goes to see the doctor and she requests to see her medical file and is told that no, she can't see that information. Why your own medical information should be held in confidence from you, that's pretty bizarre to me. I think in the future that will be looked at as increasingly bizarre. That we take responsibility for our health. As was said on the podcast with Dan Cowell, WebMD, right? Everyone is self-diagnosing now. Ideally, in the future, what you'd have is a robust artificial intelligence capable of reading your symptoms, taking certain readings, right? You feed it this information, and it feeds you back a prognosis, a diagnosis, treatment regimen, confirming your symptoms. I don't know why we're floundering. We appear to be floundering. That's the thing. The progress is definitely happening in places right now as I speak. As I say, we're floundering. Actually, we're taking off everywhere. But sometimes, just sometimes, I get the feeling that there's no wind in the sails. We're waiting on the next gust of wind. I'd like to know that every time that I check the news in the morning, if I can skip past the world section, because it's all the problems. Everything that's a problem is headlining. None of the solutions ever make the headlines. And I think it's because intuitively we already know the solutions. We already have the solutions. We don't need to be told what the solutions are. We need to be told what the problems are. I think that the collective unconscious of humanity is attempting to crunch that more serious data because it's what we need to figure out. It's the problems. It represents the problems we need to fix. The world news headlines or the front page headlines are the nails that need to be hammered down, and they're sticking up for all of us to see. I like to reinterpret the news as being that, but oftentimes when you are just when you're drenched in bad news, you reach a point of diminishing returns where it's no longer, you forget that things are actually fucking awesome. You forget the fact that we have an internet, that we have a free and open press, that we have access to medical technology and science, the likes of which our grandparents could hardly conceive of less than 50 years ago. We lose sight of how far and how fast we have come when you see these things day in and day out, and you can become demotivated. And it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that, things are actually looking up in this world. And that actually, if you look back through time, things, although with things like the Library of Alexandria and the Holocaust, things like this, that the overall condition for human beings has been improving. Yes, we've taken hits. Yes, we've taken dips. There have been valleys. But we're approaching peaks, or we're approaching a peak, or we're approaching a higher plateau overall, cumulatively. It's that kind of positive mind state. It's not foolhardy idealistic optimism. It's grounded in facts. It's rather undeniable. And then you might have a Nicholas Nassim Taleb who would give you a fat tails argument for how all of that could be wiped away within the blink of an eye. And it's healthy to have that, to hold that position as well. In the event of a catastrophic existential threat posed by an asteroid, for example, or monocultures. Although talking with Kevin Folta, he states that monocultures are not really a problem. Bananas have been monocultures for centuries and centuries and centuries. Other topics of discussion for another time. Thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. If you're looking to support the podcast, please check out the PayPal link. Hopefully in the next episode I'll be back with AJ and Alan. If not, I'll be doing it by myself again. That's no problem. Look forward to more guests. I'm trying to get a bunch of rappers on, a bunch of scientists on, and interesting people. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, you have something interesting to share, please email us at getbusypodcast@gmail.com. I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much for listening, and take care. World peace.